Hey everyone, how you doing? This is Ricky with the AZOI office team at SVN Desert Commercial Advisors. I wanted to take a moment to talk about the documents that you might be exposed to during the sale of your commercial real estate. There are a good amount of forms that you might see during this process, and understanding their purpose and their importance can make the listing process much easier. The first form is going to be the listing agreement. It's ultimately a contract between the seller and the listing broker or their firm, authorizing the broker to market the property, and it is legally required for active marketing. It ultimately outlines the broker's duties, the listing period, commission details, and terms of exclusivity. Both properties must review terms carefully and ensure that their understanding of everything there and that their expectations align prior to fully executing the document. Once a property gets listed and we start to see activity on it, the first thing that you should expect to see is what's known as a letter of intent, or an LOI. An LOI is a preliminary document expressing the buyer's intent to purchase and outlining essential deal terms. Now, LOIs are not legally binding, but they set forth the primary terms such as price, due diligence period, deposits, and timelines. They help to streamline negotiations before the formal purchase and sale agreement is drafted and executed. Then, of course, after that, you get the purchase and sale agreement, otherwise known as the PSA. The PSA is the central legally binding contract for the purchase and sale of the property itself. It ultimately covers terms like purchase price, earnest money, contingencies, for example, financing, inspections, due diligence period, and closing timelines. Both buyer and seller should ensure this document covers all aspects of the transaction comprehensively before fully executing it. We do also see from time to time a counteroffer form. If you don't go through the LOI process and you use the standard AAR form right away, you could go through and see a counteroffer form. Ultimately, it's exactly what it sounds like, where the counteroffer outlines the deal that you're countering and how ultimately the seller of the property wants to respond. And that can go back and forth a little bit, but that's why we recommend LOIs. They tend to be a little bit easier. Once under contract, in the state of Arizona, you are legally required to provide a seller property disclosure statement, or a SPUDS form. The SPUDS provides information to the property for the benefit of the buyer. It discloses material facts, environmental conditions, and any known defects. It's mandatory in many areas to ensure the buyer is aware of the property's condition before completing the purchase. And our recommendation is to fill it out to the best of your ability. Every single line has to be filled out, and it contains a lot of really important information. There, from the title company, you get a title commitment. Now, there's two types. There's a standard and an extended policy. The title commitment is a preliminary report issued by the title company indicating the status of title before issuance of insurance. Ultimately, your standard policy is going to cover defects in the title, any liens and encumbrances recorded in public records. Now, your lender may require an extended policy, which offers additional coverage, such as protection from unrecorded defects or claims. Both buyer and lender often review this document to ensure clear title during the transfer. And it is customary that the title policy is paid for by the seller, with any extended policy paid for by the buyer. From there, if you own a property within an association, you have the Commercial Properties Owner Association Addendum, or the CPOA. Ultimately, the CPOA is another document that outlines any transfer fees, any additional reserve account contributions that an incoming buyer for a property within an association might have to pay to that association upon close of escrow. From there, once the buyer has gone through their entire due diligence period, you get the Commercial Buyer's Inspection Notice and Seller's Response, commonly known as a BINSR. This allows the buyer to request repairs or adjustments following an inspection. Ultimately, the buyer lists any issues and the seller responds with an acceptance, denial, or negotiation on repairs. This document plays a critical role in resolving property condition disputes prior to closing, and those are physical disputes with the property that came up during a buyer's due diligence period. A couple other additional documents that you might be exposed to that are important to note is the American Land Title Association survey, or the ALTA survey. It's a detailed land survey often required by lenders to verify property boundaries, easements, and any other site characteristics. They provide an in-depth property analysis, identifying boundary disputes, encroachments, and zoning issues, and the ALTA survey can affect both title insurance and financing terms. So if that's needed, make sure your lender orders it early on. Then you might also require a Phase 1 or maybe even a Phase 2 environmental site assessment. These evaluate potential environmental contamination of the property. Phase 1 is a much simpler version where it looks at just the history of the property and a generic inspection. If there are risks or history of risks, a Phase 2 might be ordered, which does go through and require sampling and testing. These assessments protect both parties against environmental liabilities down the road. As we get closer to close of escrow on a property, you're going to get something that's known as a settlement statement. Now, there's a seller version and a buyer version of it. The settlement statement is a detailed financial summary of the transaction at closing. It lists costs for both the buyer and the seller, including prorated expenses, closing costs, final purchase price, and both parties should review to ensure accuracy before signing. This does also include commissions, any security deposits, seller credits, things of that nature. Additionally, you're going to get a deed of trust. The deed of trust is a document used to secure a loan for the property with title as collateral. In states where deeds of trust are common, this secures the lender's interests. If the buyer defaults, the trustee holds the power to foreclose on the property. The deed of trust outlines obligations, repayment terms, and foreclosure procedures. This is truthfully just a small overview of the documents that a seller and buyer might encounter during a commercial real estate transaction. Should you have any questions, or if you think it's worth understanding the value of your real estate, please feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to take the time to sit down with you and go over everything in greater detail. Again, my name is Ricky. I'm with the AZOI CRE sales team here at SVN Desert Commercial Advisors. Thank you so much for your time. Have a great day.